of Fearless, which is due out from Llewellyn Books this October. And I'm so excited to get to talk to all of you today about my favorite subject, which is tarot. So let's get right into it. Why I wrote Fearless Tarot is because often I would be giving myself a reading at night and I'd have a big problem or something I was really concerned about. And I'd shuffle up my cards and I'd flip over a card and my hand would be trembling and I'd think, oh my God, what is this going to say? And it would be like the Nine of Swords. And I think, well, great, what does that mean? You know, whenever I have my books on the shelf and I pull them off, it's saying there's destruction or doom or difficulty or challenges or even death. And I'm like, what do I even do with that information? And so I started Fearless Tarot as a blog post. Every day I would pull a card for my readers. And I would discuss the tarot symbolism as a vehicle for personal empowerment. And so it started to gain some traction and some following. But tarot is this language of symbols. And these symbols, these archetypes that we find in the tarot deck, are busily chatting away in the background of our consciousness all the time. And so we really need to kind of key into and listen to what those things are trying to tell us at any given moment. Some of the things they tell us are empowering and positive, and some of the things they tell us are really having us shine a light on our deepest shadows and our greatest fears. The ancient Egyptians had a wonderful concept. They believed that if you knew the actual real name of their gods, you would have power over the element they ruled over. And the tarot is a collection of symbols and archetypes that are much like these mythic archetypes of the ancient world. And what they do is they take your fears, they take the things that are busily chatting away in the background of your consciousness, and they put them in front of you and they give you safety and distance from them. And once you're able to look at the fear on the table in front of you, you're able to see it, you know, with some perspective without feeling as attached to it. So let's get started. So how I want to get through this is maybe to go through some of the most challenging cards that I struggled with. Or when I was doing readings for myself, they'd come up and my jaw would drop and I wouldn't know what to do with. And so let's begin actually with a more friendly figure in the tarot that a lot of you are familiar with. And by the way, I just have to say how excited I am to give this talk to such a great audience who probably knows a lot about tarot themselves. So whatever I say, you know, you take what you like and you throw away what you don't like. It's really up to you. Tarot speaks to different people in different ways. It's not a dogmatic pursuit, but I might have some different insights into some cards that maybe you're really familiar with, and we might just learn something different. So let's begin with the High Priestess. I love the High Priestess archetype, as many people do. She's seated between that black and white pillar. And the black and white pillars are symbols of the shadow and the light. And the High Priestess is the wise figure of the tarot. She knows that both are important for balance, both are needed. Our life isn't just light and rainbows and sunshine all the time. Sometimes there are challenges that inform who we become and what really happens. And in fact, I would argue that it's at our most challenging moments when things are really the most difficult or the saddest or even the most tragic that we really have to step up to the plate and become our best selves. Now, the High Priestess, you can see her here. She's seated behind or before that vast ocean that's behind her. And for me, this symbolizes all the wisdom that she's accumulated lifetime after lifetime of coming back to this planet. And what's so interesting is that all of us have this High Priestess archetype in our consciousness. All of us have that vast sea and knowledge and experience and wisdom that can really help us navigate whatever problem we're facing if we can just reach it, if we can just access it. You can see that obscuring that vast ocean behind the High Priestess is that veil. And if you look very closely, that veil is covered with pomegranate fruit, which is the fruit of the underworld. That's actually the fruit that Hades gave Persephone when she visited the underworld to become the goddess of the underworld. She ate the seeds and then she had to stay down there. And the underworld in myth and symbols is a symbol for our own unconscious, for the dark places within. And this is usually where fear resides. That pomegranate veil, to me, it really represents that fear of death or change. And you can see that that thin, skimpy veil is blocking out the vast ocean of wisdom and knowledge. And so the challenge of the High Priestess, right from the get go, right at the beginning of the major arcana, is to pull the veil of fears aside. In fact, the High Priestess is always about looking within. And she says the answers can always be found within. But a lot of us, when we look within, what's the first thing we're usually confronted with? It's something uncomfortable. It's maybe a fear. It's maybe something we'd rather look away from. And the challenge of the High Priestess is that you cannot stop when you look within just on that layer of fear. It's often that first gate or doorway that you're going to go through. But instead, you have to pull that veil aside and you have to access that primordial water behind her. And I just love that the High Priestess confronts you right in the beginning of the major arcana, because she's telling you right from the get-go, right at the beginning of the journey of the Fool, that there's both going to be shadow and there's both going to be light in this life. There are going to be difficult times and there's going to be wonderful things. And it's important to listen to both. So let's go through some of the cards that give us a start or kind of freak us out when we get a tarot reading. I'll get to most of them. But the first card that I think leads to some discomfort for some people is actually the Hangman. You can see the Hangman here. He's hung up by one leg. He's hanging from the branches of the Tree of Wisdom. He represents those situations in our life when life gets turned upside down and suddenly we can't see up from down and we don't know what's really going on. However, there's also a great deal of wisdom that's happening on this card. As the Hangman is hanging upside down, you can see all the energy is pooling to his head and it's even starting to glow. And when you look at the Hangman's face, he's not actually suffering. He's kind of got a neutral looking face. He's not really, angry or anguished or having a horrible time of it. It doesn't look 100% comfortable, but he is enduring the discomfort. He's enduring the life being turned upside down in order to gain a different perspective and new knowledge. And when we see the Hangman, he can just indicate that it's time to look at something in a different way. It's time to take your life, if it's topsy-turvy, and get some perspective from it and just say to yourself, what is this teaching me? What am I really going through here? What's also important about the Hangman is that he is stationary. His leg is tied up. And this means that he can't run away from his problem. He's really hung up there. He has to be present with it. He has to be really mindful. And you can see that head glowing too. So he's gaining this new perspective. And then as we move forward in the major arcana, we got the Death card. And who isn't familiar with, in popular culture, the dreaded Death card coming up on the fortune teller's table? The Death card is often our scariest symbol when we're reading the public. When you tell people, hey, I read tarot cards, and they say, well, I don't believe in that, or I'm terrified of that, I wouldn't want to get the Death card. This is the card in popular culture that really spooks people. And I think it's so appropriate that in a lot of conventional tarot knowledge, people have all kind of concluded that death really represents change. It really represents moving forward and a never going back, a finality to that change. And as human beings, change can be scary. New is scary. Going into something that you have no idea about can be really frightening. And so I find it so fitting that the Death card, which represents change, actually can also, represent our greatest fears of that change. The Death figure, you can't really negotiate with him. So when we see him in a reading, he does indicate that there is no going back, that there's a decision before you that's really going to, affect where you're going to be from now on. And the way I usually reconcile the Death card is to look at the cards that flank the Death card and really key into, what exactly is changing. If we're only looking at the Death card by itself, it just would say change. Okay, well, what's changing, unless you're asking a specific question. And this card will really show you what is transforming. And then you also have that image of the sun that is rising or setting in the background. And whether it's rising or setting is not important, because as the sun sets here, it's rising somewhere else. And this is just indicating that rebirth, that new beginning that is on the way. And then you also got those figures on the Death card who are trying to negotiate with him, like the priest that's in front of him, and the other figures, the girl who's turning away. And this is just saying that none of us can really avoid change. It is going to happen. In fact, that is the one law of the universe, is that everything will transform. And when we're able to accept that transformation, it can actually be really healing. It can actually lead us to our progress. It can lead us toward the next step or the next stage of our evolution. The next card that really frightens people a lot is the Devil card. And it's really interesting. Whenever I give readings, I like to tell people, everybody's got an angel on their shoulder and everyone's got a devil on their shoulder. Everyone's got a voice that's all light and love and positive. It's telling you all these good messages. And then everyone's got that voice that's like, hey, why even try? This is probably going to fail. I can't do this. And you see those figures that are chained to the devil's throne. And they're actually chained by choice. Whenever I see the devil card, it can represent something that you're going through almost a personal hell with. But the hell and how long you stay in that hell is really your decision. The figures on the devil card are wearing the chains, but the chains are rather loose and they can slip out of them at any time. And what this really symbolizes is that sometimes we have to free ourselves. Sometimes we have to just say enough is enough in the face of our fear. The devil figure can represent chronic behaviors that aren't healthy, situations that make you feel bound, stuck, scared, or trapped, or things that are just psyching you out. And the figures on the devil card actually mirror another card in the major arcana, which is the Lover's card. So when I was saying, everyone's got the angel on their shoulder, everyone's got the devil on their shoulder, here's that sort of pristine image of these figures on the card who are innocent and they're blessed by the angel. And the angel, whenever we see angels in the tarot, it can really represent your higher self. And what the higher self is doing is looking down at the lovers and smiling in non-judgment. And this is kind of showing you that way to escape that, hell that you can find yourself in with that devil card, that sometimes it's important to transcend. It's important to separate yourself from the situation. And most important, it's important to look at yourself with non-judgment and loving kindness so that you can really be on your own side. In fact, all three of the figures on the Lover's card are aspects of you. The male on the card could be a perception of your physical self, you're the person that's out front or in the world. And you can see he's taking his cues from the woman on the card, who represents your soul, your inner intuition, your feelings, your sensitivity. And she's taking her cues looking up at that higher self, the angel on the card. And so we can kind of see with other cards and the relationships to each other in the tarot how to free ourselves from sort of a devil negative spiral or a trip to hell that you're kind of stuck in. And it's reminding yourself of the counterpart card. And then another card that I have had a lot of trouble with too in the past is the Tower card. When we see this, a lot of people are like, oh, it's the Tower. Oh no, everything's falling apart. Although the Tower looks really destructive in its imagery, it's actually, for me, one of the most healing and cathartic cards in the tarot. Because what it does is it pulls you out of your head. It pulls you out of the place of denial. The figures in the Tower were prisoners of their own making. And with each thing they told themselves, the Tower got taller and taller, which with each denial of their true nature or what's really going on with them, or not facing something, the Tower got bigger and bigger. And then you got that lightning bolt that's hitting the Tower, and that's the universe. It's that lightning bolt that will always strike you when you're too far away from reality. And the figures that are falling from the Tower are falling from a roofed tower that actually has a crown on it, which is a symbol for the head to me. It represents being in your mind too much, being in your head. And they're falling back to the earth, which means coming back to nature, coming back to reality, coming back to your reality. And there is something really healing about just getting real, about having that awakening. And although the Tower can indicate that something you're going through is difficult or challenging or even frightening, it does indicate that the storm will pass, and that if you can get back in touch with your inner nature or with nature again and find that grounding place within yourself of which you've built so many of your successes in the past, you can build new structures in your life and move forward. And the Tower is just a card of clearing. And when it comes up in a reading, you shouldn't be afraid of it, because what it's really saying is that that which is falling apart is that which you no longer need. You don't need this in your life anymore. And once you kind of come to that realization that, oh, instead of always needing to fix this thing in my life, actually all I need to do is just surrender and let it go. then you're going to be okay. And in fact, a lot of our darker cards in the tarot really do have this theme of needing to let go. Sometimes letting go or relinquishing a sense of being in control of stuff that you're not in control of. And then sometimes also just letting go of your own personal judgments towards yourself or toward the situation that you're experiencing. The next difficult cards that I'm going to go over are actually found in the sword suit of the tarot. And I don't have time to talk about all of them, but we'll just start with the Three of Swords. That is a card that can be kind of challenging when we see it in a reading as well. And as you might imagine, this can represent wounds to the heart. This can represent feelings getting hurt. The swords are driven through the floating heart. And the heart is floating there. It would be floating above the clouds and rejoining the sunlight if it weren't hanging onto these swords. And for me, when I see this card in a reading, it represents past wounds. It represents things that have already happened, things that your heart is hanging on to. And you might think, why is the heart hanging onto these swords anymore? And the reason is that swords actually are symbols for power. And sometimes we think when we hang on to something in our heart that hurt us, it actually makes us more powerful than it. It actually makes us not the fool. So next time something bad happens, well, we're going to outsmart that. We're going to know exactly how to deal with that person or that thing. And sometimes we hang on to the sword because the power that's implied by the sword actually represents a moral superiority. So there's this righteous indignation, like, I'm not the jerk. It's actually this other person. I'm the one who's correct. But on this card, we see that the more the heart hangs on to swords and challenges, the more it's kind of suffering beneath those pelting rain clouds. And what's so interesting on this card, too, is the artist, Pamela Coleman Smith, actually has these clouds. And then if you can look closely, there's one cloud she drew that she didn't complete. And the clouds to me are representations for thought, the element of air, thinking. And what this kind of tells me is that although some complete ideas or things might have happened in the past, that you really get to draw your next cloud. You really get to draw your next thoughts about how you want to take those experiences and where you want to go in the future. And the last thing I'll say about the Three of Swords is sometimes the only way to get rid of those swords is through the act of forgiveness. And it might be difficult to forgive somebody who's hurting you or that's challenged you or that's caused a lot of pain or heartache. But forgiveness is not condoning. It's not inviting that person over for tea and saying, hey, it was okay that you abused me all those years. That was just great. Instead, what forgiveness is about is releasing the burden and letting go of the wound in your own heart so that it can start to heal. So if you're operating a reading for yourself and you get the Three of Swords about your day or what you're working on or what's going on, sometimes this card can just indicate instead of something terrible happening to you, like someone else driving a sword through you, that instead it's time to just heal something that maybe you've been hanging on to for a long time. Another challenging card that we see in the tarot is the Nine of Swords. And in fact, I've even read books that say the Nine of Swords is the worst card in the deck. And it's the worst, I think, because it affects the mind. And in fact, I should have said swords in the tarot, especially Rider-Waite-Smith tarot, are all associated with that element of air. So this is all about your thoughts. And maybe that's why the sword suit can sometimes be so difficult, because this is taking place in the realm of the mind. And sometimes if we're too stuck in our head, in our obsessions, or replaying the negativity of the past, it can be hard to see our way through the dark. And you see this figure who's waking up from a nightmare. They're clutching their eyes shut. But when you look closely at this card, even though it's distressing, this figure is actually not in any danger at all. They're safe at home in their bed. And when you look closely at the quilt, it's decorated with these roses and astrological symbols. And for me, the roses represent vitality and life. And that's just a reminder that even though this person is suffering right now, there's still a whole vital, exciting life to live in. There's also those astrological symbols that are on the blanket as well. And for me, that's a symbol for perspective, distance, looking at things from far above, and really seeing how everything is intertwined and interconnected. It's kind of that difference between addressing the problem from that universal perspective and then also just addressing it from the traumas that might have happened in the past. And then you see the pointed edges of the swords. They're all chopped off on the card, lessening the effects of the harmfulness of the swords as well. Sometimes this Nine of Swords will come up when it's important to let go of the nightmare that you're less than you really are. And so sometimes when I see this card, it's really about shining a light on my own shadows or things that are going on with my own fears or things that I really need to remind myself that actually there's a lot of vitality and wonderful things still ahead. So, tarot is just definitely one of those wonderful tools for self exploration. And when we can take it out of the realm of fear and instead go into that realm of constructive energy and really doing something positive for our lives, it really does add to our personal power. It helps us show up in the world as better people, and it also makes us more compassionate with other people as well. So I'm so grateful for you all listening to me talk for so long. I could talk for about 2 days straight about this subject. I love it so much. And if you do like my approach to tarot, do check out my book, Fearless Tarot. You are going to love it because it is the perfect manual to have when you're alone with your own fears, or you just need that objective perspective that's going to speak with some kindness about something that might need a lot of sensitivity. But now I'm so curious to know what some of your questions are. So let's go on into this. I got my chat box up again. And if anyone has any questions, please send them to me and I will try to answer them the best that I can. Well, thank you so much. What card decks do you recommend? Oh, that's a great question. So the card deck I do recommend is actually the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot because so many decks are derived from its iconic symbolism. If that deck is a little too harsh for you, for example, if you see that Ten of Swords and it freaks you out, you might want to get the Connolly deck, which is a staple. It's been around since I think the late 80s. And the symbolism's a little less harsh on that deck as well. There are so many great tarot decks, though. I mean, just go to the Llewellyn website. You'll have a bazillion that are marvelous. I also like that Radiant Wise Spirit tarot. Um, okay, there's a lot of questions coming in, so let me try to get to some more. What is your take on the Five of Cups? I love that question. All right, let's get that card out. All right, here's the Five of Cups. Here we see this figure who's obviously sad. He's looking at these three spilled cups. He's devastated. And you can see that there's a loss that's happened. Whenever the Five of Cups comes up, it's telling you to acknowledge the loss. So it's not just saying, oh, everything's fine. No, actually, there are some spilled cups. There is something challenging. Sometimes there's some grief we have to deal with here. But all is not lost because when we look at this card, there's two cups that are still standing behind this figure. And if this figure were to just turn around and look at those two cups that are still standing, he'd see that marvelous bridge going across the troubled waters before him. And this is a symbol for me when I see the Five of Cups to not cry over the spilled milk too much, to not stare at the loss so much that you're actually neglecting what's working. And when I see the Five of Cups, it's a real reminder to stop myself and look at what is still working? Where is the energy flowing that's going well in my life right now? That's actually going to be the bridge over the problem rather than just wallowing in the despair and feeling victimized by the challenge. All right, let's see. What else do we got here? Um, what do you, sorry, Gwen says, what do you say to folks who are superstitious and think tarot is evil? Well, I could say to them, I relate to that completely. When I started reading tarot, my family was severely religious, and they actually threw my tarot deck away. They thought it was satanic. I was going to go to hell. Something terrible was going to happen to me. And, it broke my heart. But my brother, who was stationed in the service, actually came back from Germany and he heard I did tarot as a kid. And he said, you know what, I'm going to buy you a new deck. And I actually got a book from Llewellyn called Tarot for Beginners by P. Scott Hollander. And it just changed my life. It really opened my mind and my awareness up to different tarot interpretations and also how to apply the symbols positively. When I run into somebody who's intolerant of tarot, I usually can understand because look at how tarot is presented in our popular culture. And it's really up to us to say, well, if you're afraid of it, that's okay, but would you like a reading? And then maybe make that reading a positive experience. All right, let's see. Uh, this may be Gina Haley says, this may be a goofy question, but when reading tarot, Whose intuition is at work? I say the person you're reading for doesn't agree with the interpretation. Is the reader or the person you're reading for, or both? Okay, so as an oracle, as a tarot reader, our job, in my opinion, is to present the case for what's going on in the unconscious of the person sitting across from us. And so our intuition is at work because we're interpreting these archetypal symbols that we've been drawing on caves for thousands of years. And we're actually helping people navigate through their own questions, their own fears. And so we're using our intuition about, maybe what to say or what it applies to. But the person who's listening to you is also making their own connections as well. They're also delving into what that symbol actually means for them. So I think actually both people's intuition is at work. Court cards are challenging. Any advice on reading the court cards? Well, you better get Ethany Dawn's court card book. I think she wrote a book called Your Tarot Court because she actually goes into all of the court cards just beautifully. Court cards for me can symbolize people that we are interacting with. They can symbolize aspects of ourselves, or they can also symbolize situations. And the cards that flank the court cards can often highlight a little bit more information on how that court card should be interpreted. And in fact, in my book, Fearless Tarot, I have this wonderful tarot spread that's based on the 10 card, Celtic cross spread. And it's actually an extended version of that, where instead of one card for each position, I actually have 3. And that helps you contextualize what each card means a little bit more because they interplay with each other. And so I think that that might be a little bit helpful, especially if you're trying to think, is this court card a person or is this a situation? The cards that are around it might be able to flank that. Let's see here. What other questions do I got? I'm going to scroll back a little bit. Is it true? Monica says, is it true that you should not do a self-reading when you're really upset? If so, when is the best time to do a self-reading? That's a great question. And it really will matter to each individual person. There's no, hard and fast rule that everybody's going to be clear-headed about a reading if they're angry. My opinion is that if you're attached to a specific outcome and you're going to your tarot deck and you're wanting only that confirmation of the thing you want to hear, that is kind of saying you're kind of getting in an obsessive thinking and you may not like what is reflected back on you. Tarot cards only reflect upon you the state of your mind at the time of that reading. They can show future possibilities, but you're really the one who's in charge. And so if you're very upset, I think you can do a reading for yourself. I think that can actually be really therapeutic, but you do have to be open-minded or objective about what the symbolism is telling you. And again, that's the reason I wrote my book and also my blog, which was to give people some positive tarot interpretations to help them when they're really dealing with their greatest shadows. Or even dealing with clients that might have some challenges and you get this card and you're just like, how does that apply? All right, let's go into this. Swords are tough. I've always had problems with the 7 of Swords energy. Can you offer some insight on that one? Absolutely. A lot of people hate the 7 of Swords. Here you see the Thief on the card. And like the High Priestess in her veil, she can look at the fear. She's looking within. And if you're just looking at that surface of the veil, you'll say, thief, awful, I got to run away from this. The 7 of Swords is asking you to look a little closer. What's actually happening on this card? For me, my interpretation, you see this man, his homeland has been invaded by an army. They've set up these tents in the background, and you can even see the troops way in the background, all deciding how they're going to divide his land. So he's been invaded, and he can't fight the army by himself. He's only one man. He's outnumbered. So what is he doing? He's using his wits. He's clever. He's sneaking into the enemy camp. He's thereby stealing their weapons. And he's disempowering the army without ever having to fight. And for me, this is just such an important symbol because when the 7 of Swords comes up, it can indicate a challenge that you're confronting that might even feel like an invading army in your own life. And the important thing to do with the 7 of Swords is think, how can I use my wits? How can I get clear-headed? How can I get out of being upset and maybe look at this dispassionately? This is a very tactical card. And so if we're asking the question too, A lot of our tarot interpretations are based on questions and what the context of the card is. If you're asking, can I trust this individual, and you pick the Seven of Swords and you see the Thief, well, of course that's going to say maybe we need to be skeptical, or maybe we need to keep our wits about us. But if we're asking about, should I start a business, and we get the Seven of Swords and we see the Thief, I don't think it's meaning your business is going to get robbed. Otherwise, everybody who starts a business that this card comes up for would be getting robbed left and right. Instead, I really think that this is saying there's a huge obstacle in the way, and you really need to outwit the challenge or outwit the thing that's difficult. All right, let's see if there's one last question I can take here. Okay. Debbie says, I haven't used tarot in a long time. I've been using more oracle decks, feeling I need to get back into tarot after listening to you. Oh, I guess that's not a question, but thank you for that. I should have read the whole thing. Um, let's see. I want to get one more question asked here. All right. Willie Wilby says, what advice can you give to readers who are reading for friends and family that fear the tarot? My advice is not to make it scarier for them. So if you do pull a difficult card over, don't just say, oh, well, you got the Ten of Swords, you're screwed, or nope, that's going to be bad. A lot of times people are afraid of tarot because they're really entrusting you with their most sensitive things. They're entrusting you with their heart's desires, their deepest fears, their greatest hopes. And so as a reader, as an oracle, you really have a responsibility to take care of those feelings and to be compassionate when you're delivering energy or advice to people. And a lot of times in our modern world, we sometimes think that if something is said more cruelly, or if you're just meaner about it, well, then it must be more true. And if you're kind or you're positive about something, well, then that's probably just BS and it's just sugarcoating it. But that's not always the case. And so I think with people who are struggling with a fear of the tarot, what you really want to do is lean into the cards that are in the reading that are talking about their positive traits, about their positive energy, or the things that are actually going well in their life that are actual strengths that they can point to. Once you start speaking to people's higher selves, their higher, better angels, you usually get them on your side. And so finally, the last thing I want to do is just pull a couple cards for everybody watching today and see what comes up. A little bit of parting advice I can give you. Six of Wands and the Fool. All right, so what I would say about this is it's time to go forward fearlessly. We got the Fool. He's starting his journey. He's getting started. He's getting his bags packed. He's moving on. And this can just indicate that this is a time for you to progress with something in your own life that it's time to take a risk with. Whenever we see the Fool, he tells you to let go of your fear of looking like a fool because it's actually robbing you of some of your greatest experiences. And if you're too afraid to do something, and that's why you're on the fence and that's why you're not going for it, this card can really indicate that you just want to take that deep dive and go for it anyway. And that confidence that the Fool is talking about is also prevalent with that Six of Wands, where we have that figure who's head and shoulders above the rest. You can see he's being celebrated in a parade, and there's this group of people who's all cheering him on. But when you look closely at the card, there's one individual, I don't know if you can see them, but he's in the background, and he's kind of got that face of envy. And what this is indicating is that if you're shining brightly with something in your life, it's important to shine unapologetically. You'll always have that one troll in the background who doesn't like themselves very much and is actually going to look up at you like, who do you think you are? But that should not be a hindrance to you being of excellence, to you being your best self. And so I just leave that with all of you today. I want to send my blessings to all of you for being great listeners. It's such an honor to talk to wonderful tarot people. And I really want to thank you again. And if you want to see me at any time, you can check me out at Instagram, Elliot Oracle, or at my website, elliotoracle.com. Otherwise, I leave that with you today. And I do hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.